and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Institute of Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School. We are delighted to welcome National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy to the forum this evening to talk about the recent climate conference in Glasgow, some of the most fundamental questions underlying the climate crisis, and much more. Thank you for all those joining us on Zoom and on the IOP social media channels this evening. My name is Matt. I'm an undergraduate student at Harvard College, originally from Vienna in Austria, and I'm visiting from the London School of Economics, where I study philosophy, politics, and economics. And I'm interested in political participation and economic policy design. I will hand it off to Stephanie now.
Thank you so much, Max. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Lin, and I am a sophomore in Eliot House, originally from Long Island, New York. And at Harvard, I study applied math, economics, and computer science, and I'm passionate about economic policymaking and developmental economics. We are so excited to welcome Advisor McCarthy to the forum this evening. Advisor McCarthy brings her extensive regional and national experience in environmental health policy to her role serving as the first White House National Climate Advisor for President Biden, where she leads the White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy. Prior to that, she served as the 13th Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama. Advisor McCarthy also currently serves as the President and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council, a nonprofit international environmental advocacy group with over 3 million members and staff. It's truly an honor to have you join us today from the White House. So thank you so much and welcome.
Hey, Stephanie, it's good to be here. Hey, Max, good to see you both.
All right, so we are just going to jump right in. Advisor McCarthy, you're joining us tonight after 2 intense weeks of negotiations in Glasgow for the COP26 climate conference. Can you summarize a little bit for us what it accomplished and what it didn't accomplish?
Well, Stephanie, first, thanks for letting me come back to the IOP. I know everybody listening and you two are smarter than I am, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say, or at least try to be. I'm not known for being as careful as I probably should be. But it's really fun to talk about what happened at the COP, and we can get into as much level of detail as you want. I think you all know that my job was to bring a really strong domestic message so that folks would know that the U.S. was back. So that was the best for me. The greatest accomplishment, I think, was to make sure that the rest of the world knew that President Biden and his administration was fully committed to the challenge of climate change and tackling it. The exciting thing was that President Biden ran on a platform of climate change, which is why I'm sitting here in the White House. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found it a very attractive thing to leave NRDC to come here because I love that job. But I'll tell you, the conference itself, I think I've been to a lot of COPs because I'm old and I've been hanging around these things for a long time, trying to push a climate agenda. And the thing you tried to do is to go in there with some goals. And our main goal was to hang on to 1.5 degrees centigrade, because we know that the difference between 1.5 is 2, and 2 is massive in terms of the impact that 2 represents, and how we can really mitigate that impact by taking some accelerated and broad climate action. And so I really think that the COP in Glasgow, what was an opportunity to actually galvanize the world a little bit, have the U.S. rejoin as a real partner. President Biden didn't come in there saying, I'm leading the effort, because you can't do that after the prior 4 years of this administration. But he brought a really healthy and concrete domestic agenda. We even got the bipartisan infrastructure deal approved while Glasgow was going on. So we were pretty excited to be able to deliver some concrete steps forward. And I do think that because of the increased commitment by a lot of countries, basically we received an opportunity to really get more than half of the world economy in line with the goal of 1.5 in terms of commitments. And we made some really big commitments on methane, on forestry, on really big investments in the developing world from the developed countries, including the US. So hopefully we made our mark there. What it didn't accomplish is an answer. You know, it's not like we all ponied up and said, we're going to do this and this within this period of time, and we're going to get there together. But I do think it set the stage for the big turnaround, if you will, that we were waiting for, which is really having the U.S. stand together. The disappointment was that leadership from China and Russia, the leaders, the principals did not attend the first couple of days with the others. That's a big loss. But I think in the end, it will be their loss, not the loss for the rest of the country, because we were moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for that fantastic summary and context. And some of the points you mentioned, we're excited to sort of dive into those a little deeper later. But the other question I had for you was, you know, interestingly, I'm sure you've heard in the news, Greta Thunberg has captured the proceedings in the COP26 in 3 words, blah, 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 citing that the conference was business as usual and not pushing global leaders out of their comfort zone to enact true and urgent change. So my question for you is, to what extent do you find this to be a legitimate summary of the COP conference?
Well, maybe 1 blah was justified, but 3 may have been overkill. You know, I can understand her frustration. You know, we went into the COP knowing full well that when you're dealing with so many countries, it's not easy to get agreement on a number of big things, even though I think we all have seen with our own eyes and ears and heard the challenges that every country is facing. And the United States is not immune to that. You know, we had almost $100 billion in damages just last year with all the wildfires, the droughts. So the good news is there was no heartland present at the COP. We were not seeing any climate deniers. It was all about how do we get there. And so I understand that young people are very frustrated, but frankly, my hope is that they can remain critical in pushing, but they have to push. You know, there is no question that they've made a big difference in terms of raising the profile of these issues and raising their demands, but be a little bit more specific than thinking that it should all be characterized in 3 simple words. It's complicated, but we made a lot of progress. You know, first day, the president came in and we got the global methane pledge. We walked in there with 30 countries. By the time the first day was over, we had 105 countries. And methane as a super polluter really matters. And that was a great opportunity. You know, we partnered with other countries around the world on Net Zero World Initiative, which is all about deep decarbonization with other countries that really can focus their attention on these issues. We did a clean energy demand initiative, which is about corporate procurement. We did a first movers coalition, which is about some of the largest corporations making big investments in innovative technologies. We did a terrific achievement with 100 countries that really represent 85% of the world's forests, that we would halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. And so the US came in with 4 times as much commitment money-wise to meet our goal with a strong 50 to 52% reduction off of a 2005 baseline. And people respected that. So I do think we made a lot of progress. I know we made a lot of friends back again, but clearly there needs to be more. So I don't mind at all the fact that there's disappointment or that we want to push, especially for young people, because they are going to be the bellwether. They are the ones most impacted in the end. But I do think we need to really figure out how to do it in a way that really captures the moment a bit more effectively. That yes, there was progress. We need to build on that. But I think the country's worked hard to come up with those commitments. They're big deals. And no country has the answer to get to the kind of reductions we need as quickly as we want to have them. That's going to come out of the momentum we built in Glasgow. That's really hopefully going to energize this. And yell at me if I'm giving too long an answer. You don't have to sit and smile. If I just go, and I'll do it.
Not at all. You touched on the point of disappointment from young people. And I think it appears as though a lot of the disappointment and much of the disappointment from young people does not just come from the lack of promises, but countries following through on their pledges. Previous climate conferences have often culminated in unmet targets and unkept pledges. And many now fear that COP26 will be no different. What do you think these shortcomings tell us about what we can achieve together as an international community?
I think there are a couple of things. I mean, you're absolutely right. That is the challenge. When countries make international commitments that are specific, for the most part, they work really hard to make them, turn them into reality. I've seen it on a number of occasions, even with voluntary agreements that countries do try to step up. And I think what we saw here was that, we have really significant investments from half of the world in even strengthening their NDCs by next year. So we are talking about really concrete steps. And frankly, in the US, the exciting thing for me is we announced the global methane challenge, and that many countries stepped up. They call them states in the international world, so I'm getting my language confused here. We had them step up, but we were able to deliver the plan for the US. We said, not only are we making a commitment, but this is how we're doing it. And we used a mix of investments and regulations. And we know that we can get there. So that's what we're going to have to see, is how many of these countries can really define a path forward. And I think what you saw was really significant steps forward to get countries to be much more concrete in what they were doing. But it's no question more work needs to be done, and it's challenging. But to me, the turning point may be is that, as I said before, there's no climate denial, but there's also really concrete things that can be done today, technologies that are deployable at scale. And so we have to run fast in this decade. That's what's going to matter most. And I think the opportunities are there. And when I say opportunities, I mean it. President Biden's framing is not about let's all sacrifice and do something for the planet. He said, no. We're going to invest in ourselves and do something for ourselves. So this quest to a clean energy future is actually totally in line where the world needs to head. It is not a sacrifice. It is an opportunity. It is how we're going to grow economically. It is how we're going to make the world healthier and preserve it for our future. So there is an entirely different recognition and mindset, which says that the country that races to achieve these goals will be the winner, not the loser. And so if you want to play and you want to win and you want to grow economically, this is how you need to move forward. And so I think the framing is entirely different now than it ever was before. And that's what gives me the most hope.
Still, many people do wonder whether, the pledges are too little, too late, right? There was a report by the International Energy Agency that found that even if countries follow through on their pledges, we'd get global warming to 1.8 degrees Celsius. Some are much more pessimistic, arguing that warming will rise well above 2 degrees Celsius. UN Special Advisor on Climate Action, Calvin Hart, mentioned a 2.7 degree figure instead. how do we hold nations accountable, right, to the pledges they have now made, and where do you think is the leverage?
Yeah, I think, Max, that I just want everybody to understand that 1.8 is a magnificent difference from where we walked in, like monumental. It's the difference between actually winning and losing. But if we get that extra 3, you know what, we need to get to 1.5 without question. But I think the biggest opportunity we have is as it's been defined, is really getting the investments we need in having the developed world really step up to the plate with the developing world, because the developing world is in the crosshairs. Just like in the US, we have environmental justice communities that have been overburdened. Just think about the damages we're seeing in the developing world. We need to invest in a way that's going to build from the start a renewable energy, clean energy infrastructure. We have to start divesting of the unabated fossil fuel investments, which is part of the dialogue that's significantly moving forward. We have to start. We don't want to keep retrofitting our way into the future. We don't have time for that. And so a lot of the dialogue was not just about building clean energy, but how do we begin to recognize that in the way in which the international community is investing. And you saw huge investment opportunities that USAID put on the table for the developing world. You saw increased investment from the US and other developed countries to actually help with new programs in the developing world. So we have to recognize not only does the developed world need to get its act together and start making the shift to clean energy, but that the dumbest thing we could do is to keep investing in fossil fuel investments that do nothing but continue down that path in other countries when you have the opportunity and the viability of renewable energy in so many locations. And part of it, I think, Max, you may know that I spent some time at Harvard School of Public Health a few years ago, because I think health really matters to you, me, to all of our families and our future. And if you think about it, this shift to renewable energy and this build renewable first is the best thing that we can do to save lives across the world. We lose millions of people all the time as a result of the impacts of air pollution alone. And we need to be smarter than that. So it is incredibly consistent with giving people a change in the world that they can see, that makes their lives better now, because we'll never win if all we keep arguing about is what's good for the planet and framing it in planetary measures like 1.5, 1.8. We should just say that we kick butt by creating huge opportunities for investment that will help people today. And we have more to go. And we have another COP coming up where we can start closing that gap even more. At least that's my framing. And I'm not a Pollyannish type person. You know, I know that it's a very difficult lift, but what we did was pretty difficult. And all it will do is, if we make good on these commitments, which we all want to do and track, we will be able to see where we're succeeding, where we're failing, and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, I think you once mentioned that the climate is an intersectional issue. I think that
it is a major intersectional issue because it is basically existential. And there is nothing more intersectional than that. It is about climate. It's about energy. It's about health. It's about food. It's about water. It's about clean air. I mean, you name it. It's about jobs. It's about innovation. It's about where you invest. And so I do think each one of those intersections is an opportunity to give people some hope for the future, to make their life better in a way they can see it and feel it themselves in every community. That's what was so exciting about the bipartisan infrastructure deal, because you had Democrats and Republicans saying this is historic. Every state will benefit. Every urban area, every rural community will see their lives bettered between now and 10 years from now. And so I'm pretty bullish on that being the energy, if you will, to drive further change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are really important ideas to think about when thinking about what the levers are to hold nations accountable. And in the same way, I wonder, do you think that trust would be another pillar of building sort of that leverage? And sort of going back to, when you said we're sort of bringing back 4 times the amount of investments in our dedication to climate change, because with the Trump presidency, it marked a rupture in our approach towards climate change back in 2017 when we pulled out of the Paris Accords. And now that we're back at the table with the Biden administration, how has the rupture altered cooperation with our international partners? And have you witnessed a decline in the trust in the United States with its commitment to climate action?
I'm asked this question a lot, Stephanie, not as exactly as you framed it, but it is very clear that, I've been still having conversations with world leaders even since I left EPA and the Obama administration transferred over. And people have been asking us this all along. But if you look at the trajectory of how the U.S. in terms of our economy has been moving, you will pretty much see that clean energy is winning. It kept moving forward because the economics were there. It really matters to find cost-effective solutions moving forward so that you can really continue the push, even when the federal government has decided to exit stage left. Right is what I should say. Exit stage right. But what you didn't get that, huh? All right. But anyways, what we found is when you look back, we could have gone faster. Had we had 4 years of commitment, things would have been better. But
Right.
What held us in check was states and local communities. States really moved forward so that half of our population, or actually much more than that, is now covered by a net zero commitment or by climate actions and requirements at the state and local levels. So we know that we made a difference and they held the line for us. Did I like it? No. Did I like having to just rely on state and local governments? No. Am I glad we're back? Absolutely. And frankly, we were, I think, welcomed back because it was such a big player. But I think we have to keep proving ourselves. That
Right.
was one of the reasons why that passage of the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the passage soon of the Build Back Better plan, I guess Build Back Better bill now, is actually hugely important because it's a big signal. Plus, it's such a big accelerator of action here in the U.S. that will get well beyond what we need to achieve that for our nationally determined contribution. So I'm excited about that. But we'll keep proving ourselves. That's what the domestic action is all about, is we're not abandoning, we're moving forward, and we'll keep thinking of new ideas. We have plenty of stuff up our sleeve, lots of ways that we can go.
I want to talk for a minute about some of the ethical questions that are surrounding climate change. You touched on developing and vulnerable nations before that would face most of the devastating consequences of the climate crisis. But at the same time, industrial production allows people in those countries to attain the standards of living that we enjoy in the developed world. Limiting production in those countries would directly curb the economic well-being of people in developing nations, so their leaders argue. Do you find that sustainability is fundamentally at odds with justice?
I don't think it is. And I'm not sure the developing world thinks that. I think that what you see is there are countries that are more developed that feel like there's real challenges for them for the transition over. And I think there's legitimate responsibility that the United States and other large developing countries that are rich with strong economies, I wish it was stronger, it'll get back again, but with strong economies, we have a lot of responsibility to support that transition without question. But if you go into this thinking that clean energy doesn't provide jobs, doesn't allow growth, then I think you're mistaken. I do think that the kind of innovations that are already available to us to deploy and the innovations of tomorrow are where the world needs to head. You know, we just can't continue on the path that we are on and expect to succeed either as a planet or as any individual country. And frankly, I don't see the developing world asking to make sure they can keep having all that fossil fuel investment. They're looking to actually be able to grow, right? They're looking for the opportunities to succeed, the opportunity to manufacture, the opportunity to give their communities jobs, the opportunity to raise their standard of living, the opportunity to grow food without risk of drought. These are big challenges, all of which need to be resolved, but we cannot do it with old thinking. We have to do it with new, and the developed world has to step up. And I think we showed that we know that, but we have to keep moving forward as the developed world and show them.
So in thinking about who carries the burden and the responsibility, right? If we compare China and America, for instance, China emits roughly twice as much carbon dioxide as the United States in absolute terms. But if we look at it on a per capita basis, it's actually the other way around. The average American contributes around double as much to greenhouse gas emissions as the average Chinese. Do you find that us people in the West, right, Western industrialized nations, have a special responsibility to curtail production in front of everyone else?
I think that we have an outsized responsibility and opportunity if we figure out how to make sure that we are getting much smarter about the way in which we move towards electrification and move towards renewable energy. I mean, it's the winner already. You know, so there are definitely barriers, but there are also huge outsized opportunities. So it should never be considered anything but an opportunity. But I absolutely agree with you, Max, that we have, you know, we can't be pointing fingers at other countries if we're not taking appropriate action domestically to lower our greenhouse gas footprint. And I think that doesn't eliminate the fact that China has outsized responsibility to its own citizens to deliver clean air and outside responsibility to the rest of the world to reduce their overall footprint. So all of these things are challenging, but I don't think it does any good to do finger pointing as much as it does good to collaborate as a world, and we all step up. I know it sounds a little bit naive to think that we can all do that, but frankly, what's really disappointing is this continued sacrifice framework. Sacrifice is not what people are willing to do when you compare it with opportunity. You have to give people a hopeful path forward. And I don't think a path to a clean energy future is about what we give up as much as what we gain. We just have done not a great job at defining that well enough for people to understand that there is a wealth of opportunity right now. That I think the developed world needs to step up to make sure that opportunity is equally available. And if it becomes equally available, it will win big time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting framework. And so as we're talking about sort of sacrifices or in other words, trying to think about in terms of opportunities and untapped potential. What are those sacrifices and opportunities, not just in our country, but also in poorer countries, in order for us to be on target for our climate goals? What does it really look like in terms of everyday practice for our individual lives?
For our individual lives here in the U.S., there's a lot of system changes that are going to happen. We need to have our transportation upgrades. So we're talking about not just investing in roads and bridges, but investing in getting people out of their cars, investing in transit, investing in our port infrastructure, which is a big deal for the environmental justice communities that live around our ports. We're talking about investing in our airports and in sustainable aviation fuels. We're talking about repositioning our agriculture significantly to smart agriculture, which means you look at all of the practices and products that allow you to keep the carbon in the soil while you maintain productivity, even in the face of the drought conditions that we're seeing today. We're talking about ways of really moving our electricity grid forward so that we're investing in that grid in a way where renewables have a chance to connect everywhere in that system. We're talking about moving forward with our rural energy delivery system to make sure that less of it is based on coal and more of it is based on renewable energy where we can find those opportunities. We're talking about homes and businesses transitioning over to electrification, which is going to be absolutely be essential, not just energy efficient, but actually moving to electrification. So we're talking about a series of movements forward that really will be beneficial to our pocketbooks as a whole. But more importantly, it's really going to position us to be leaders in clean energy again, and move forward there. Now, there's other things that we also need to do, I think, with the developing world. And a lot of it is, I mentioned before, USAID providing another $150 billion. That's what we've organized in terms of public and private climate finance by 2030. That's a lot of resources to actually start moving forward to deliver clean energy and natural climate solutions, and more than that, across the world. We have to do more of that, because I do think that these are the ways in which other countries can develop and do it in a way that's beneficial to them. And again, doesn't have that sacrifice framing that I think is so unnecessary at this point. We should not be looking to ask the developing world to slow down their development. It's about how they develop and having us support that. It's just not right to think that we want that anyone should have to hold back their own ability to grow as a country and economically and feed the people in their country. It's just how you do it and how we work together to make sure that's done in a way that's going to allow that development to be cleaner and cleaner over time.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of that changing and the means of production and how they're going about production would have to entail a lot of international collaboration between, the developed world sort of pitching in and making that happen, making those processes more efficient.
And I think that the developed world, we have real challenges in the developed world to actually move forward with our own investments. But that does not diminish our responsibility to the developing world in any way. It means that we have opportunities to actually share ideas and innovations, to really think about how we use our investments to make sure that the human capital is advanced. Every ounce, every ton that we reduce of greenhouse gas emissions benefits us. Right. And we have to stop thinking about it as a cost.
Right. All right. Yeah, wonderful answer. I think we're going to move over to a little bit more of the open-ended questions. So stepping aside a little bit, just thinking about youth-led organizations like Fridays for Future. They've been a defining movement for today's generation. And so what role do you think youth-led organizations have played in advancing climate policy at home and abroad? And I know you spoke a little bit to this earlier, but you could elaborate on that.
You know, there's a couple of things. I think, I think young people have played a significant role in two different ways. One is reminding us of why we have to do this, why it's necessary to think differently. And I think, like in other generations, young people are the conscious, the conscience of the rest of society. They remind us of what we need to do and why we need to work together with one another. They are a compass that will not shift. And I think that's a good thing. They have to keep pointing to the answer, not just the incremental steps. And while I know that no COP like this one can actually do everything that needs to be done, and I know it's challenging, I don't at all deny that young people should be impatient, should demand more. I think they need to be vocal. But in some ways, I think they need to continue, to do what the IOP and others open up, which is a dialogue of how to make things work next, how to get to that next level. They shouldn't sell themselves short and thinking all they can do is sit on the sidelines and push. They know, young people know they can be part of the action. One of the most fun things in the Build Back Better Act that I'm sure we are going to advance starting next week on the Hill is the Civilian Climate Corps. It's a $19 billion investment in putting young people back to work in conservation and climate and resilience efforts and other things. And you bet we're going to be able to use people for this purpose to give them the opportunity of a lifetime. And it's not just going to be young people, but we're going to use this and help with all the workforce transitions that we need, basically retraining and redeployment, because we need everybody feeling like they're part of the action.
Final question before we open it up for audience Q&A, and this is a question that we ask all our guests at the forum. What is the greatest challenge facing our democracy today?
I think our greatest challenge is to rebuild the middle class again. I feel like we have lost too many people to poverty. It's time for us to invest in the communities that have been left behind. I think that will help us to give people an opportunity to enter the middle class. And that is what brought us the future we have now. And I think moving forward with jobs and union labor and good paying jobs is the way forward. I came from the sort of lower middle class, so forgive me. I thought it was really cool when we could put food on our table every day, and I think everybody should have the security to have that.
And with that, we'll move on to open audience Q&A. I think Cassidy just texted in the chat. If you have a question that you would like to ask Advisor McCarthy, please just raise your hand, and then you'll be able to come online and ask your question directly.
Right. So I think as we're asking people to sort of gather their thoughts for Q&A, we're just going to do a really quick lightning round. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question. Advisor McCarthy, how does your job differ from what people might expect?
I think the biggest surprise people have is that, I work in the White House. And when you say that, everybody thinks it's really glamorous. Yes, I'm not far from where the president is, but for the first 8 months, Ali Zaidi, who's my deputy, and I lived in basically a closet. It had no windows, and it was an old NSC office, which means it was secure. So every time I called somebody, it listed as Egypt calling them. And every time anything came in on my cell phone, I couldn't answer it. So there you have it. It's not the most glamorous place in the universe. But it's
how surprising. That was very unexpected. All right, I think Max has the next question.
Okay.
Yeah, a second lightning round question. You just spend a lot of time with delegates from all over the world at the COP. Which country has the delegates with the best sense of humor?
That's a really good question. And it's not a barrel of laughs when you go to the COP, I have to say. Pretty serious people doing pretty serious work. But I do, President Mary Robinson, who was president of Ireland quite a while ago, is now an elder at the UN. I get to hang around with her, and I'll tell you, there's nothing like Irish humor. I am absolutely prejudiced about that, but she is so funny. We went to lunch one day when she came to visit when I was at Harvard. She came in and talked to folks, and we went to lunch at a tapas place, and she said to me, she looked at the menu and she said, "So Gina, which potato are you going to order?" And I thought that was pretty funny. Maybe stereotypical, but true.
Brilliant. I think we have Tarina on the line. Tarina, if you are ready to ask your question, simply feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video. Hi.
Awesome. Hi. Thank you. And thank you so much for being here with us. It's such an honor to get to meet you, even in this virtual space. My name is Tarina. I'm a sophomore at the college, and I'm studying political empathy. My question is really focused on thinking about, like you said, if we end up exiting stage right, I got the joke. And that's what happens in the next 4 years. And we do see a shift towards the right. For me as a Virginian, seeing that shift towards the right is something that concerns me and scares me. But what would that mean for climate policy? How do we continue to apply pressure and make the big change that's needed? Because, we do have a clock. We are ticking down slowly and slowly. So how do we make sure that communities are protected, especially communities that are communities of color, marginalized folks that are feeling the impending doom of the climate crisis? Thank you so much.
Tarina, thanks. It's an honor to get to meet you too. Did you say political empathy? What'd you say?
I did, yeah. So we have a concentration at the college called social studies. You get to basically come up with your own focus field. And so I'm studying the way that empathy can be infused into politics and social movements.
That's awesome. Maybe we should chat about that at some time. Now I forget your question. I think that, first of all, the resources that we now have available, 1.2 trillion, you can't just build like we did before. So when we're talking about investing in making progress, it really has to be in every community, and it has to be resilient. We have to rethink where we're investing and what we're building. Okay, so that's just basic importance. But the one thing I just wanted to really mention is that it kind of, I think, goes beyond that. We have to figure out how, I think, Tarina, maybe you have views on this, but, I think the pandemic has really set us back. I think the pandemic is one of the reasons why we really need to step back and take a deep breath and move forward again better as a country. We lost a lot of ground in our houses, getting bitter and angry and upset and scared. And all of those were perfectly human and correct emotions to have. But it meant that we needed a shift to something hopeful. And that's why I'm so grateful that, honestly, that President Biden took a risk on running on a climate agenda. And part of that risk was progressives were going to be there for him, and they were. Young people stood out for him. And so the good thing about this is that we're going to push that no matter what. But the hopeful framing is critical. We have to make people think and see change in their lives now and frame climate as an outcome of that. not as the reason to do it as much as the outcome. Do you know? So that's how I see it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you so much for all you do. And it was wonderful meeting you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Robert from the college. Robert, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, my name's Robert. I'm a first year at the college. Thanks so much for coming today. So my question is a bit about the United States and our commitments and what we've pledged to do. So, President Biden declared that that the United States would be leading by the power of its example. In many ways, I agree with that statement. I think he's done a great job with that. But at the summit, there was a key pledge with, I believe, above 40 nations signed it to limit coal production. And that was an agreement that the United States chose not to sign on to. I was just wondering if you could comment a bit about this, why the United States didn't sign this pledge, and what the United States believes we can benefit from not reducing our coal production to those levels.
Yeah, I think what the U.S. was trying to indicate with their vote is I think we all know that coal is not the fuel of the future. We also know that there are tremendous opportunities to invest in renewable energy in the U.S. And if it's good enough for us, it ought to be, equally beneficial to other countries. I can't tell you all, there's all kinds of nuanced language in all of these issues. So I would want to defer to Secretary Kerry about the decisions that were made. But I do know that he is well aware that the shift from fossil fuels is essential. The question was how quickly, and how do we reconcile that with our current challenges here? We know we have coal-fired facilities that are operating. We also know that many people are looking for investments in how to capture the carbon and inject it. And that if that is a viable opportunity, we don't want to cut that opportunity off. So there are many complexities that go into this, but from my perspective, we're working really hard to make sure that we start limiting international fossil fuel investments and providing real opportunities for renewable energy moving forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Brilliant. And I think our next question is from Cormac. Cormac, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video.
Hi, I'm Cormac. I'm a freshman at Harvard College, and thank you so much, Advisor McCarthy, for joining us tonight. My accent gives it away, but I'm Irish, so I appreciate your nod to our national sense of humor there. And it was funny you mentioned Mary Robinson, because that's exactly who my question is about. Mary Robinson said during the weeks of COP that she felt it was too pale, too male, and too stale, which was, I think, something that reverberated around the world as we took in, from afar what was going on in Glasgow, for many of us very far away, as we are here in Cambridge. And I just wanted to gauge, in your position as someone who was at COP and with the US delegation, do you agree with that assessment? And how do you think we make the conversation around climate change more intersectional and bring in those voices and make sure that maybe COP27 isn't too pale, too male, and too stale as well?
Mary Robinson is I don't know. She seems to have hit her stride in her older years. She's terrific, and she says it like it is and how she sees it. And I would never disagree with her. But Mary does a lot of work internationally and with the developing world as an elder. She sees a lot about how people are suffering and the challenges. And it makes her very anxious to see change. And I don't blame her. So she has every right in the world to continue to push and to say we haven't done enough. There is nobody that I know in the US delegation that would disagree with that. We haven't done enough, and we have to keep pushing forward. But my framework and what I was talking about is more a comparison to what used to be and COPs of the past but also the fact that I do think there was much more, many more international agreements in smaller groups than I had expected before. I think if you look at the methane and the forestry commitments in particular, they are huge paths forward. So I do think there's some glimmering hope here, and I do think it was great. But as always, I would never disagree with Mary Robinson.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And while we wait for our next audience question, I did want to touch on a personal note. You've devoted your entire life to protecting our environment. Can you tell us what inspired you to devote your life to public service?
My dad was a public school teacher for his whole life. And when you're a public school teacher for your whole life, you don't make a whole lot of money. And so that was never my goal in life, which is a good thing if you want to be a public servant your whole life. You could do well, but not great. And when I was growing up, I went to a grammar school that was right across the street from a company called the Plymouth Rubber Company. And every day they would manufacture rubber. And at certain points in time, the pollution, the smell would just knock you off your socks. So we had to go around shutting the windows to try to keep the smell out. And I had actually friends who died of brain tumors. Now, I'm not suggesting that I know for sure where it came from, but I do know pollution when I smell it. And it just never left me. I just thought it was the worst thing ever. And I ended up getting really engaged in environmental issues, specifically hazardous waste issues, when I was very young. And it never left me. To me, environment and health is not just intersectional, but you cannot separate the two. You just can't. And so I'm in it for the people. I love biodiversity. Don't get me wrong. I get all that, but I'm pretty much focused on making sure that we take care of the health of our communities and our families first and foremost.
Yeah, that's a really personal story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Love public service. Yeah. I hope you all think about it. I love it. It is so cool. It's so hard, and it's so much fun. And no, you never get rich, but it is the richest opportunity that you would find. At least try it for a little while.
I like the way you put it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have one more question from Serena from the college. So Serena, feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Serena, and I am a sophomore at the college. First of all, thank you so much for being here and providing your insight on a topic as important as this one. It's truly an honor to have you here. So moving on to my question, you emphasized the importance of how the developed world has to really step up. And so on that note, I wanted to briefly address the annual $100 billion promise of climate finance that high income countries pledged in 2009 to provide to lower income countries. And so clearly over a decade later, we've seen that those targets haven't been met. And we've heard the Biden administration's plan to bring higher levels of commitment to support these middle and low income countries. So I was wondering if you could provide a little bit of insight on what exactly that might look like.
Yeah, we actually, you're absolutely right that we haven't yet gotten to the $100 billion level that is necessary for the developed world to support the developing world. But we've done a couple of other things here in the US. So we have quadrupled our commitment, which is good. Hopefully we want to do more. We've also identified, as I mentioned, the USAID, USAID for $150 billion. We also announced something called the Prepare Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. I always have to read that because it's a terrible name, but it spells prepare, so they stretched it. It's a good name if you just have to say prepare. And that's basically working with Congress to provide $3 billion in adaptation finance every year by 2024 to the largest, it's the largest commitment that we've ever made for climate impacts to the most vulnerable climate change challenges that we're facing worldwide. So that's a good thing. In the US, domestically, we have our Justice 40 initiative, which is looking at making sure that climate and clean energy investments are accrued, at least 40% of them, to environmental justice communities. And then as a whole in the developing world, we're looking at trying to coordinate with our private sector about stepping up for much more significant kind of opportunities. And that is all about investing in innovation challenges that we can help across the developing world, as well as just look at issues like transportation, which crosses countries so that we can move forward. So there's a number of different ones, and the other ones are on forestry. So I think there's a lot we can share, a lot of money that is now being committed by the U.S., but clearly there's more to be done. And I think one of the biggest challenges I think we have to face is the challenge that a lot of the developing world is growing rapidly. And if we really want to make sure that growth is in the direction of change that will benefit all of us, we really have to invest in it. We really have to consider that to be the challenge of our time. So I think the U.S. is on a significantly changed path. And we know that we have to go to clean energy, and we understand why, and it's to our benefit. But that means whatever we learn in terms of innovations and opportunities have to be shared with the rest of the world. And I think you will see the Department of Energy and NASA and NOAA and others are going to be very actively joined together in panels and projects that are going to be international in scope so that we can share what we have learned in technologies that are successful. So it may not all be about where do we spend our money, but it's where do we spend our time and how do we share those technologies? Because every time you extend that kind of technology knowledge and work with individuals in other countries to make that possible, you are actually investing in yourself. And so I think there's huge opportunities right now because people understand that it's become a very small world with a very short time horizon for us to make it healthy again.
Great, thank you so much.
Brilliant. And our last question will come from Eric.
Hi, Advisor McCarthy. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Eric. I'm a senior at the college studying environmental science and engineering along with government. And I really see your role as one that's focused on kind of promoting public health and environmental justice. And so I wanted to ask you briefly about the issue of lead in drinking water, even though it's not directly climate focused. I'm 4 days from completing my senior thesis on that particular issue. And so I'm curious to know, particularly with the funding that came today in the infrastructure bill the president signed, kind of how the administration plans to prioritize communities that are most vulnerable, most affected, and kind of least likely to remediate that issue on their own as they go about distributing those funds.
Well, Eric, that's a really good question because the infrastructure bill does have a significant amount of money to get rid of lead pipes, that's impacting drinking water. But we also have money in there for PFAS chemicals, for cleaning of some of the drinking water supplies that are very challenging. And it's our intent to get to 100% lead pipe removal in homes, in daycare centers, and in schools. Those are going to be really important efforts of ours. And they are going to have to take a collaboration with states and local communities. But I also want to recognize that our environmental justice framing, which this is part of, our efforts are really guided by a couple of really important advisory groups. One of them is called WEJAC, which is our Environmental Justice Advisory Committee for the White House. And we're gonna try to get at 100% of the lead pipes, but we're also going to look at how do we track the investments that are being made with our climate dollars and our clean energy dollars so that we can ensure that our Justice 40 commitments are made. One of the things you're going to see over the next couple of weeks is you're going to see a screening tool unveiled, which identifies environmental justice communities so that we can track investments and make sure that we're meeting that commitment. So I'm glad you raised it, because this is not something which we're going to say, well, we did our best job at it. We are going to look at every penny in every program to make sure that it's being designed with environmental justice in mind.
That sounds promising. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Advisor McCarthy, for that answer. Now we're actually going to hand it off to former Congressman and former IOP Director, Phil Sharp. But really quickly, I just want to say a huge thank you from both Max and I for being here tonight and for having this amazing conversation. But over to you.
Thank you.
Sharp.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Obviously, we've just heard from an exceptional political leader, and that's what I want to focus briefly on here is both politics and to expand on what Gina is talking about in terms of climate action opportunities. And I deliberately used the word political to describe her leadership, which is a really important and positive thing in my view. Because both as a regulator at EPA, she led an incredible effort to put together the Clean Power Plan, and now as advisor to the president trying to get his whole of government moving in this direction. It really is a major undertaking of political work to try to get people of diverse interests and diverse views and diverse economic situations to work together to get climate action. And she is an exceptional example of this and one that we need more of. And at this point, as anybody who's ever run for office, and perhaps all of you know, many Americans are in fact allergic to political work and to politics. They don't even like the word, to the necessary bargaining, the necessary persistence, the necessary toleration of outcomes that do not match our expectations. And yet people in politics must continue to work on. And indeed, all of us are probably disgusted when we see a few, sometimes too many, political leaders who are incompetent, corrupt, or just friggin' stupid. Unfortunately, most of the leaders are not, but I don't even need to name names. I suspect many of you could identify some of whom I'm speaking about. But the point is that politics remains a critical means to improving our society. And one of the great things about the Institute of Politics, which I know many of you are involved in and taking advantage of, is its effort to help students expand their knowledge, grow in experience, come across inspiration to help become leaders in this country and elsewhere around the world. And indeed, in our country, of course, that leadership is critical for refurbishing our constitutional democracy, as well as meeting this incredible challenge of global warming. Now, as Gina spent time and many of your questions focused on, we've been highly focused for the last 2 weeks, our climate attention on COP26. And probably in the next few weeks, it's all going to be focused on the US Senate and hopefully the passage of some very important climate activities. But all of us, and she was the first to point it out, know that this is not enough. And there are many people as a consequences who care deeply about this, who are very disappointed. And what is, I think, particularly important is not to lose perspective and to slip into pessimism, which many people I talk to have a tendency to do. And what we have to do is have a better grasp of the incredibly dynamic changes that are already underway in America and elsewhere around the world. And many of these changes are independent of government action. And I want to stress that they're independent of government action. We clearly need strong government policies. Those are important, but they are only part of the solution. And what we find is many non-government entities are in fact incredible accelerators of this transformational change that we're seeking. We now see extensive action to reduce the carbon footprints by corporations, by investors, by universities, by charitable and religious organizations, and a plethora of other institutions, not to mention all kinds of individuals. And indeed, I think there's a great awakening in America to this issue, and I think probably also around the world. Gina has, one of her functions is to lead this whole of government effort, and she does it incredibly effectively. But we also need what one might call a whole of society, that is all of society approach. Whatever frustrations we may have with our current economic institutions or in our political institutions, we need to recognize at the same time that it's precisely our market economy, precisely our decentralized government, precisely our highly developed civil society that makes possible so many opportunities to take action, opportunities for innovation, opportunities for investment, opportunities for accelerating the change that we all seek. And indeed, the decentralized structure of our economy, our government, and our civil society allow for the enhancement and even the financial reward for individual effectiveness. And I think one of the mistakes we sometimes make in our thinking is, especially those of us that are highly focused on politics, is that is critically important, but it is only a piece of the ball game here. And we've got to play on all across the situation. In 1969, which I and a few other people on this can remember, we went to the moon, and Neil Armstrong called his first step a great leap for mankind. And certainly it was an extraordinary scientific, technological, and organizational feat, no question about it. But only a few 100,000 people made it happen. Most of us could only watch in awe, but not so here with climate change. Each of us can take action, whatever our age, our abilities, our career paths, and those actions, when done by millions of us, will in fact add up. And Gina mentioned near the close, one of the newest possibilities for engagement, which is to enroll in the Civilian Climate Corps, which we hope will be funded by the Reconciliation Act. This has been launched by President Biden. And of course, it's very much like the Peace Corps, which was launched by President Kennedy. And indeed, Mark Darin, the current director of the Institute of Politics, at one point was appointed by President Clinton to lead that critical program, which engaged so many people, especially young people, in productive work. And that is what we hope to get from the new CCC. Now, in short, there are extraordinary climate opportunities that lie ahead, as Gina McCarthy emphasized over and over. There are opportunities for leadership, for innovation, for investment, for careers, and I think very important for personal fulfillment. And there certainly is no time for just hand-wringing. This is a time to roll up our sleeves and go to work, just as Gina McCarthy is doing and follow her example. Well, so let me close the forum by thanking Gina, whom I've admired for many years because of her extraordinary leadership. And thanks too to Max and Stephanie, who demonstrated incredible knowledge and skill in leading this, not just moderating, leading the discussion this evening. And frankly, you folks give me hope for the future, because I don't mind us old folks handing it off to you and your generation. I've also been asked to announce that tomorrow night, there will be a forum at 6 o'clock, a very important one, which will be the 2021 Salant Lecture on Freedom of the Press. And the speaker will be Maria Ressa, who is a Nobel Prize recipient and CEO of Rappler.com. Nancy Gibbs, who is the director at the Shorenstein Center, will be the moderator. So thank you for being attentive, and please carry forth her message this evening.